Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including Erica Engelhut in conversation with Amy Stewart tomorrow night for Erica's book, Gory Details, The Dark Side of Science. You can register for this and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase tonight's book, Wild Women in the Blues. If you have any concerns during the presentation, you can send a message in the chat section. And if you have any questions for either Denny or Julie, please type them into the Q&A section and we will get to as many questions as we can. We're very excited to welcome Denny and Julie. I want to tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. Denny S. Bryce is an award-winning author and three-time RWA Golden Heart finalist, including twice for Wild Women in the Blues. In addition to writing for NPR Books and Frolic Media, she is a public relations professional who has spent over 2 decades running her own marketing and event management firm. Working to become a professional dancer, Denny moved to New York in the 1980s and waitressed at a Greenwich Village nightclub headlined by blues singer and jazz pioneer Alberta Hunter. Both transplants from Chicago, the women bonded over their mutual love of the city and the blues. It was through Miss Hunter's stories of her early career singing in Chicago's South Side during the Roaring 20s that Denny was introduced to the world that decades later would become the setting of her debut novel, Wild Women in the Blues. A member of the Historical Novel Society, Women's Fiction Writers Association, and Novelists, Inc., Denny is a frequent speaker at author events. Originally from Chicago, she now lives in Savannah, Georgia. As a journalist, Julie Carrick Dalton has published more than 1,000 articles in the Boston Globe, Business Week, The Hollywood Reporter, and other publications. She contributes to Dead Darlings, The Writer Unboxed, and Grub Street's writer blogs. Julie also owns and operates a small farm in rural New Hampshire, the backdrop for Waiting for the Night Song, her debut. And without further ado, I will turn the event over to you folks and have a great
Hey.
Hey, Denny, I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. This is really special. I love your book and I'm really excited to talk with you about it and share it with everybody. Did you want to start off maybe telling us, just giving us an overview about the book before we get into some questions?
I certainly can do that. Wild Women in the Blues is historical fiction. It is a story told in a dual timeline. That means I have a 1925 timeline and then again a 2015 timeline. In my 1925 timeline, my main character, Honorée Dalcour, is a chorus girl, a very ambitious chorus girl, and she has her mind set on performing at the Dreamland Cafe, which is a upscale, fabulous black and tan restaurant, black and tan, well, they serve food, nightclub on State Street. In 2015, I have a grieving young graduate student. He's a film student. He is suffering through a traumatic loss. And he makes up his mind to accomplish one thing, to get one thing done. And that is to finish his grad school thesis, which is a documentary film on Oscar Micheaux. Before he lives in Santa Monica, California, and he lives with his grandmother, and he finds some things up in the attic, a reel of film, and some photographs with some telephone numbers on the back. So, and the photographs are of this young woman, 1925, with Oscar Micheaux. So he sets out, because he makes a phone call, to find this woman, and he does, in Bronzeville in Chicago, and her name is Honorée Dalcour as well.
Well, I love the way you connected the two timelines, and you connected it in ways I didn't expect. I'm not going to get into any spoilers, don't worry. But there was things in the way you wove these two stories together that really pulled me through. Like, I needed to know when you would switch back from one timeline to the other. you left me like wanting to know more, and it really pulled me right through the book. So I was engaged the whole time. And I would love to know though, what was the, I can see your love for dancing, and I know you and your love of music. So I'm not surprised that that this is where your book is, but I'm curious what inspired the story. Like I see a lot of things about you that I see in this book, but I want to know why this story.
The story actually has a couple of levels of inspiration. I will start with my maternal grandmother. She came to this country from Montego Bay, Jamaica. Kingston, Jamaica. I just found something in Ancestry.com of her listing on a ship, and she's from Kingston, and she's also 2 years older than she told me at the time, which I thought was very interesting. But anyway, so she came to this country in 1923 and was in New York City. But she ended up in Yurksville, Ohio, which is an incredibly small town, still an incredibly small town. Her and my grandfather is another story, but she seemed very connected to 1920s. There were photos all through the house. There were of her with these great cars, and the piano in the back sunroom was as old as the Dickens. Her sewing machine had that level, you had to bump it to sew. I mean, it's just, the house was just full of very old stuff, and old stuff to me. So I'd ask her questions because I was just so curious, and she would tell me these stories. And I was like, oh man, 1920s sounded cool. And then the other bit of inspiration, definitely as the young woman from Belmont Books mentioned, was Alberta Hunter. Alberta Hunter I met in, I won't give the year, but she was in her 80s, making a comeback. And I was a waitress at a place called The Cookery in New York. And she and I just would chat, and then eventually, over time, I recognized or realized that, wow, I knew someone who was there in the room, if you will, when it happened, back in the day when Bessie Smith was singing, when she was on the road, hanging out in Chicago with Louis Armstrong and Lil Hardin Armstrong. So it was like, oh, all these things sort of just collided, I think. And I was like, I need to be writing historical fiction.
Well, that's funny. You just stole my next question. I was going to ask you, because I knew you'd been, working in clubs or a club in New York, and I knew Alberta Hunter had made a comeback. And I was going to ask you, did you ever cross paths with her? And you just answered that one.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really interesting to know.
Yes.
So there's this question I'm dying to ask you about, because this is the thing that really, there's so much about this book that spoke to me, but it's like your use of body language and the way you inhabit your characters' bodies and the way they move, and just like the sway of their hips and the lines of a neck. It was like, in some characters, it was like incredibly sensual, and in some it was like foreboding, but I felt like it was different than in a lot of books I read. I felt like you really were in their skin being these characters, and it was really effective and very beautiful and terrifying in some scenes. You feel the body weight of someone who's, you're afraid of, but I felt like even the bodies that weren't moving, I felt like I knew how they were standing, their posture, and the way someone's arms might be splayed, even if they're unconscious. Like, I felt like you did this amazing job, and I'm imagining you as a dancer. I've never seen you dance other than maybe at a writer's
and you
conference.
will never see me dance.
Oh, Denny. This is another conversation that I will see.
Right, that's a whole separate lifestyle conversation.
But I feel like I see the dancer in you, and maybe I'm drawing conclusions that aren't there, but I just love the way you did that.
I am, it's a combination of my dance background as well as my theater background. Blocking is incredibly important. Where people are in the space, how they feel about their bodies in the space, how you move to and from another body. And I think, yes, it does have all of my stories, even the ones that you haven't seen yet, have a physicality that I definitely is rooted in my dancer background, my backstory. I danced, well, and before I danced, I was a gymnast in high school. This is going back in time. Not that far back, but back in time, okay? And so physicality has always been in my mind, you know, how people move, how people deal with their space and their limbs and all of that stuff. So everything you said, I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me, because I and it's not always conscious. It's just the way I see a scene.
And I think it works with the music in the book too. You know, your characters seem to have a rhythm to the way they move in the room. The way the rhythm of your language is really beautiful. It has this, you know, it's very lyrical, but it also has the, you know, there's a lot of jazz in the background of a lot of these scenes. We're in these clubs and the dancers are getting ready and there's sawdust on the floor, and it's very atmospheric. And I felt like I could, you know, almost hear the music in the background, the wail of the horns. And
I should share that I'm so excited that so many people have made a comment about the music in the story, about feeling it as an intricate part of story, and being able to cross that line and actually hear it. And it's something that I don't know if I deliberately did, you know?
yeah.
It's more so, it was the requirement of the scene, that these elements, but as a dancer, music has always been, when I was younger, and now to this day, I mean, one of the things I did, some people say I can't write with music. I have to have music when I'm writing. And it doesn't matter if it has lyrics or not, because I don't know why. I'm comfortable with the sounds. Silence, sometimes I revise in silence, but I write with music.
Interesting.
That's funny. No, because you know, you're writing and then you're revising.
The two totally different parts of your mind, yeah.
It's like, whoa, boy.
Well, I would love to hear more about Honoree, this you know, this character, because she is just a force. I mean, she is this woman who, like you said, she has so much ambition and she just owns her place in the world. You know, she has, you know, owns her goals and her dreams, and she's puts herself out there. And I loved that about her. And I want to find out how you came up with her, and if there's anything, like any connection you have to creating.
You know, she evolved over time. That was initially, this book was in response to a call from and it wasn't a book, it was a novella. And so I can't remember the publisher right now, but they put up a photo and they said, write a story about this photo. I looked at the photo, to me, it looked like 1920s. And to me, it looked a lot like my cover. And I said, oh, she's a chorus girl. And, you know, and then I incorporated some of the personalities that, you know, I always can dive back to my family. My family gives me characters. I must admit, they really do. I probably will be writing versions of my late mother for years to come, because I found her fascinating. But Honoree had that determination, and also she's 19, so she also has she makes mistakes, but when she screws up, she has that youthful, well, you know, let's keep going anyway. But it's not always upbeat, because she still is rooted in her time. She has pain that she has to deal with, but emotional pain, family pain, all sorts of stuff. And then what I like about the 2015 storyline is that it's almost a reversal of story in a way, because you have this I'm going to get this done type of ambition, and here comes all the stuff that tries to stop her. And then you have Sawyer, who is stopped. He starts in a stopped position, and he has to come through this, and he needs help. And 110-year-old Honoré Downpour, in her way, is there to help.
And I also thought it was really interesting that once he started talking with Honoré in the 2015 timeline, and at first she's very resistant, but then she needs to tell her story. You see that, like, this, she's an old woman, and at the end of her times, but she has a story, and she's going to get it out there.
She's going to get it out.
I feel like
she's just a little stubborn.
She's just a little bit. She's great.
Just
I love
a little bit of stubbornness there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the cover, so I can't not ask you about this. I'm going to hold this up so everybody can see this cover. I love this cover. It's hard to see the glory of this dress on through Zoom. So you should all just buy your own copy, I think, would be
right?
Great from Belmont Books, of course.
Well, I have to give credit where credit is due, and the cover design is by Christine Mills, who is the creative director for Kensington Books, and the cover illustrator is Sarah Knott, N-O-T. These two women collaborated to bring this to fruition, and we had maybe 4 treatments of different approaches, and then when this came across to everyone, it was like, oh yeah, we're done.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. It's like the detail work on the dress, which you can't see on Zoom, to the fan in her hand, and the beads on the pearls on her neck, and it's sexy and sensual, but classy, and there's motion, like the dress is moving.
Yeah,
there's so much in this
motion. There's a thing that I always say about this, besides the fact that I believe you can tell by the angle of her neck and the expanse of her back that she is a dancer. In addition, there's something on her mind. Just look the way she's looking down and over that left shoulder, or whatever shoulder that might be.
There's a lot on Honoré Delacour's mind.
Yeah, there's a lot on her mind. And okay, so maybe I'm adding a little bit of stuff that may or may not be a part of the reality.
It's living art.
So I have definitely appreciated the work that Kensington has done to, as a debut author, as you well know, it's hard to get out there and cut through on whatever level, cut through the entire, there's so many books, so many great books, so much to choose from, different genres to choose from. And it's not easy to jump out there and say, okay, I'm going to be this author in this bucket or whatever. But I've been very excited about my experience as a debut author. I'm thrilled that
sorry to interrupt. I was gonna say, this might be a good time, so Denny and I both are debut authors this year, and we're part of a group online of other debut authors on Facebook that have been a real, I know, at least for me, a lifesaver of having this community of people to support each other and cheer for each other, and some place to vent when things are hard. And I launching a debut novel during a pandemic is not how we all envisioned this, but it's been kind of amazing. because all these bookstores like Belmont Books and other independent booksellers that are just there for us, which is I'm pretty grateful for.
It's been just to back up a little bit and talk some more about the 2021 debut author group. There are close to 200 authors in this Facebook group. But what is the generosity of the authors in terms of sharing their experiences, which only add to our ability to handle what's coming at us because someone else has had a similar experience. And I think Julie, you were in the 2020 group too.
Yeah, my book was in January, so I kind of straddled both 2020 and
well,
21.
my book was originally supposed to debut in 2020 in September. Then they moved it to December. Then they moved it to March of 2021. And this was definitely an impact, or because of the pandemic. And the pandemic in publishing, I think that it's changed how the model, if you will, for how we look at books, how we market books, how we communicate with our audiences. In the event that I just finished, I was with Laura Kamoy, author of America's First Daughter and Dear Hamilton, and she made the comment that, as we move hopefully soon out of the pandemic phase, some of the models that we've embraced, including Zoom, it'd be fun to be on a big screen in a bookstore filled with people and still, interacting.
Yeah, a hybrid.
Yeah, something in between, so we can see more people, and more people can see us, because travel for authors can get crazy pants.
Yeah.
For lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. So I want to ask you another question before I forget, because I've been wondering about this. So there's a lot of so the book is historical fiction, and the honoree is not a real person, but there's a lot of people in the book who show up in the background that are, and I'm really curious about that, because I have to say I did not know who Oscar Michaud was. I've since looked him up because I was curious. But we see Louis Armstrong and Lil Hardin Armstrong, and she has like a role in the story. She's actually like a character on stage, and talking. And now what you said about Alberta Hunter makes some sense to me. But I want to know why these folks showed up, and what what made them enter your story.
Well, I'll say that I wanted Oscar Michaud to have a role because I'm a film junkie, and I love old movies, and his story, some of his early films, which you can also see on YouTube. Let me explain for those who aren't familiar with Oscar Michaud. Oscar Michaud is a legendary African-American filmmaker. What he did in the early portion of his career was to produce, write, and direct race films. These race films were stories starring African Americans, but as opposed to what the white filmmakers were doing at the time, the African American characters were not caricatures, were not evil. The things that you would see in Birth of a Nation, he was countering the negativity and the polarization that was caused by a film like Birth of a Nation, which was made in 1915, and it depicted, sort of like the cast. The good guys in Birth of a Nation were the Ku Klux Klan. The bad guys were, I'm simplifying it, but I'm not really, were the African American men. So Oscar Michaud said, I'm going to make movies and tell stories, but I'm not going to use these negative characterizations. So one of the films that you can watch on YouTube is called Body and Soul. It stars Paul Robeson, and Paul Robeson was a civil rights activist. He was a footballer. He was a baritone on stage. I mean, he was touted as one of the most brilliant actors. I think, if I recall correctly, his presentation or performance of Shakespeare's Othello is still one of the longest running plays and he did this in the 40s, longest running versions of Othello ever to be performed. So I wanted to bring, my fascination and love of old film into the story someplace. And that was my opportunity with Oscar Michaud. And then I gave him some moments in the 1925 because Chicago was one of the spots he hung out. So I wasn't stretching it too far.
And I love that, that he enters the story, because we hear about him from Sawyer in the 2015 time. I looked at doing this historical research, and then at this one point we meet him, and I was really excited about that. I was like, oh, I know who he is now. This is exciting because I hadn't heard of him, and I'm glad I was introduced to him from your story. Yeah. And also, what about Lil Hardin Armstrong? Was there a reason you were drawn to her?
There was totally a reason, because she was in the newspapers. One of my research sources was the Chicago Defender archives. And definitely there are articles and books and stories about Lil Hardin Armstrong. But during the 20s, she was a superstar in Chicago. Before she married Louis Armstrong, she had her own band. She was a renowned jazz pianist. She was literally called Queen of the Stroll because she would get up in the morning. There's a quote in one of my resource books where she'd get up in the morning and just dress up in her best looking clothes and just walk up and down the Stroll, because it didn't matter what time of day. She would quote, I think, Langston Hughes, and say midnight. Daylight was midnight. Midnight was daylight. It didn't matter when you went out there. There was always action. There was always something going on the Stroll. So I wanted her in the story because she epitomized what Honore was striving to become. That woman who was in charge of her own life. I think it's in the book. You know how you write the book and then you
forget what you cut.
In the book. It's sort of like this big blank thing happens. Yeah. But I found this in a news article where she insisted that the marquee for Louis Armstrong read the greatest trumpet player in the world. So she was also his Svengali in the early days of his career. So an amazing woman that I just had to give a little bit of time to, and she has a role to play in the story.
Absolutely.
And I find her fascinating. And she's not just the wife of. No way.
Exactly. And the other women in the story, I mean, there's a lot of wild women, obviously, in the story, but they're wonderful and they're so complicated. We didn't talk about Honore's the kind of roommate friend, like a woman takes, a young girl she takes under her wing. And the relationship between these two women, they both are stubborn and they both have strong opinions. They can be, feisty to each other and to other people, but the love between them is like so, it's so there, even when they're when they're tugging on each other and pushing back. But I loved that the women in this story weren't portrayed as, none of them were perfect, but they were perfectly themselves.
Yeah. That's again, when I'm looking back on the process of writing the story, I definitely was tapping the atmosphere that I remember in a dance company, and the camaraderie that is a part of it, but also there's a certain level of competition, and then there's a certain kind of familiarity that because you're always with these gals, and in my case there were gals and guys in the company and whatever, but sometimes you loved them, sometimes you hated them, sometimes you never did love them. And you have to work with them, and then the snippiness is just came because I've been in that environment where snippiness is a part of the backstage action, if you will.
Yes, like Trudy, she definitely had some good lines as one of the other dancers, and I just enjoyed that. I thought your characters were really full, especially the women. They were very full characters, and they had, they had their own thing going, all of them. They weren't, you know, the same
Yeah,
character.
they each had, I was asked about character development earlier, and I think you would probably attest to this as well. Characters, well, characters for me are hard because you want to give a fully rounded character unless purposely you want a one-dimensional character, but that one-dimensional character has to have a one-dimensional role,
Yeah.
is the way I feel about it. So otherwise, if you're going to let them talk and give them a name, you got to give me something.
Yep.
It just has to be a little bit more to it than just they have this moment in time, you know. So I tried to play with as many personalities and be consistent, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about the research? Because there's so much detail in here. I can imagine you must have had reams and reams of research to
Well,
create this.
research it's a good thing. The old reporter in me comes to the forefront, but I love research. I love it because it's learning, and because I'm not a historian, I'm a history geek. Let me make this clear. This is a geek here, and I just love digging into the past. So the first step, and I'm looking for, I have show and tell. That's why I'm showing books that I've used. The first thing that I really dive into, and this is at the advice of an author, the late L.A. Banks, who was a fantasy writer for St. Martin's Press years ago. She wrote the first, what was called at the time, the first, it was called the Black Buffy series, you know, because her main characters was a demon fighter. But one of the things she said that you want to do right off the bat is make sure you understand the economics of whatever society that you're working with, whatever world you're building. Or in my case, I needed to understand the history of the economics of Chicago's Black Belt during the 1920s. So this book became very useful. It's called Chicago's New Negroes. It was helpful. One of my other helpful books that I don't have handy right now was about the Policy Kings. Policy Kings were the guys in charge of the gambling racket within the Black community, because they didn't let Capone come in and mess with policy gambling, or the numbers, running the numbers, as other people might call. Louis Armstrong, great book called Master of Modernism. Got a similar book about Oscar Michaud. And probably, however, the two key resources for research for me were the Harold Washington Library in Chicago and the archivist that I worked with there, whose name I can't remember because it's been 6 years of research. But Chicago, the Harold Washington Library was just a phenomenal resource. I got exposure to some fabulous collections that I would never have been able to get my hands on. The other resource was the Library of Congress. And there I worked with an archivist again, as well as several of their librarians who were just so helpful. So helpful. It was amazing. So, and then for music, I mean, for the sound of the people, I listened to a lot of jazz from the 20s.
I can hear it in the pages. I also should remind people who are watching, because everybody gets caught up in the conversation. If you have questions for Denny, you can pop them into the Q&A, and we're going to get to questions shortly. If you have any jazz questions or dancer questions, I'm sure Denny's got lots of stories. I might have to. We might have to finish this conversation later because I want to know all the dancer stories. But yeah, so don't forget to put your questions in the box as we continue talking. But so I'm also sort of curious what else you're working on.
Well, I am working on several things, which is exciting. As you know, back-to-back books are exciting. I have my second book with Kensington is called Blackbirds, and it's a story, another dual storyline, another historical. set in 1928, Los Angeles, and 1968 during a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles, doing some fun, different things with the story, but I'm very excited about the two time frames. Los Angeles in 1928 had a lot going on, especially with the backdrop of Hollywood, or back then I think it was called Hollywood Land, and a hotel that opened in 1928 is also an important part of the whole story. And in 1968, a main part of the story is a 1968 lime gold Ford Mustang. So
Okay.
with an 8-track built in. So
I can't wait to read it. I can't wait.
oh, but that's okay. I have more.
I know. I asked you that because I knew you had a lot in the works. I want to hear the details.
Okay, so I'll mention 2 other books that are coming up. Actually, there was a story from 1925. This is going to be a little bit closer to biographical fiction, about a woman named Alice Rhinelander who was married to a man named Rip. Was it Rip? Kip Rhinelander, and they got a divorce that was highly contested and a very dramatic court case because he accused her of not telling him she was colored. And it became a huge front page news story for quite a while. Back in the 20s, before regular TV news and radio, the front page of a newspaper was, because that's the same time period, 1925. You also had the Stokes monkey trial. You also had in Chicago, Lieb and Loeb, the 2 young men who killed the young boy for no real reason. So,
You have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, with that and another story as well.
So can I ask you, Denny? I know you aren't planning to read, but there was a question in the chat asking if you were going to read, and I was wondering if there's any chance I could get you to read one paragraph. Would that be, or I can read it if you don't want to.
I can do it.
I think the first paragraph of chapter 2, when we first meet Honore, I read that paragraph and I'm in. I want to follow this woman. Do you think you could read that just real quick? Because I love your voice and I think other people might want to hear it, if that's okay with you.
Okay, I'll start. I'll do this just for you all because you all are fabulous. Okay, chapter 2, Honore, Friday, October 23rd, 1925, Chicago. Honore Dalcour sashayed into the basement of Miss Hattie's Garden Cafe a little after 7 o'clock in the evening. A squirrel collared coat hung over her arm and a box purse dangled from her wrist. Weaving through crates of bootleg whiskey and burlap bags of sweet potatoes, she swung her hips with an extra oomph. It made the rhinestones on her drop waist dress crackle, just like she wanted them to, and with good reason. The proprietor of the Dreamland Cafe, the ritziest black and tan nightclub on the Stroll, was holding a midnight audition at his establishment on State Street. Only girls Mr. Buttons had seen dance with his own eyes and wanted to hire bad enough to risk a beef with another club owner received an invitation. Rumor on the Stroll was an invite guaranteed a spot in the Dreamland chorus. Honore was no dumb Dora and didn't believe every note of chin music she heard. But this once she absolutely, positively believed. And why not? An invitation had been pushed under her front door that very afternoon. Hot diggity dog. After 3 years of dance lessons, tap classes, practicing all day, peeling potatoes all night, and selling policy player dream books, a pamphlet of lucky numbers for gamblers, while keeping her boss, Archie Graves, and his fat fingers from creeping too far up her shift. And well, just like that, she was on her way to the Dreamland Cafe.
Thank you, Denny. I know I put you on the spot there. I appreciate you being a good sport. I love that meeting, that when I met Honore, that first, the young Honore, I was pretty excited. So I wanted other people to just get a little taste of it.
A little taste of her.
Just a little taste. And there's a link in there if you guys want to buy it. There, you can buy it right from Belmont Books right now. But
nice.
yeah, thank you for doing that.
Oh, no problem. Okay, ask me, do we have any questions? Do we want to try some questions? Do we have any in the chat? Oh, I see something.
There are a couple. I don't know if yep, there she is. I think Stacy.
Oh, okay, Stacy's going to do those. Okay. Thanks, Stacy.
Of course. Victoria says, I'm new to your work, but excited to learn more. Do you find that there tends to be a theme or signature style across your writing?
Well, as I'd say that thematically, I'm definitely looking at telling stories about African-American characters, and be they historical or fictional in the past, but from the past, that are riveting stories. I want to tell stories that people will connect to because of the female. I'm definitely going to focus on female protagonists. I will say that, because these women are strong-minded. I like to say that some of my characters will not necessarily they won't necessarily write the world, but they will conquer the space that they live in. They are going to make the most out of their lives, despite the obstacles that they may, the obstacles that they must deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so I think thematically, I'm talking about writing women who are challenging as women, but also in a time where their lives aren't necessarily going to be cookie cutter existences at all, if that makes sense. That's a tough question. I only have one book. Come on.
But you've got three. You got three more in the works. We know you've got a lot of work.
Right. This is true. Mm-hmm.
Another question from Victoria. You said that you get a lot of inspiration for your characters from your family and people you know. What inspiration and characteristics might we find from yourself within the characters?
Probably on some level, my sense of humor. I can be funny, and also determination. I'm a pretty determined person, and I'm also, and that comes from, I started writing 20 years ago. Yeah. 20 years ago, I started writing when I'd come home from work. I was running a PR and marketing firm, and I traveled a lot around the country on a regular basis. So anytime I got home, I'd kick back and started writing, of all things, fan fiction. And I wrote, there was a TV show called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I wrote Buffy Spike fanfic. And that was relaxing to me. And I think that aspect of I took a lot of time to transition from fan fiction writing to original fiction. And then once I took to original fiction, I became a craft junkie about, I really wanted to dig in and understand it. So I think that determination and patience are characteristics that you'll find reflective of my personality. And then of course there'll always be an undertone of music and movement and motion in my stories.
I also see a little bit of you in Sawyer, even, just in his like doggedness of finding the story, but having the knowing when to sit back and listen and not push. I see a little Denny shining through Sawyer.
In Sawyer, yeah, Sawyer.
Sawyer. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Sawyer. It's in too much tonight, but yeah, you're gonna have to read. There's not enough time to talk
about. He's tough to talk about. He's something else.
Yeah, so you're guys gonna have to read it so you can get to know Sawyer too. Yeah, lots going on.
Yeah, he does.
Looks like Victoria would like to know if this fanfic is located anywhere she can find it.
Actually, it is out there. It's still out there. It's very vampire-y. I use the same name, Denny, in fanfic for decades. It's still out there.
Yeah, so you have to go hunt for it now.
If there's one that that won't, I've taken down some, but back in the day, there was such a large fanfic community over surrounding the Buffy fandom. In particular, it was as crazy as Harry Potter eventually became, but we had a lot of fun. We had conventions and traveled to meet people. I've met all of the cast. I have photo proof that I know David Boreanaz and James Marsters, who played Spike. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Well, I should.
My wasted youth.
Well, I should share that I also dabbled in fan fiction back in the 70s when I was in elementary school, writing fan fiction for Wonder Woman and Mork from Ork TV shows, and then forcing my friends to perform them. So yeah,
Yeah, the performance end is pretty scary.
It was great. It was awesome. We used to play in the woods, and I'd get my friends on Charlie's Angels too. We definitely did some Charlie's Angels.
I know. Charlie's Angels was like a go-to back in the day.
Yeah, I was very into making my friends act out my scripts for 70s TV shows when I was in elementary school. It was exciting times. Well, I didn't ask you at all about your process or your like writer journey. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that tonight.
If we don't have more questions.
There's one more.
Heads to Google.
Go ahead. We have time.
I'm sorry. I looked at someone's note and I panicked. They're heading to Google to look up Buffy Spike. You'll get scared because there's so much of it, and some of it is brilliant. But my process, I'm actually fine-tuning my process because I can't take 6 years to write a book. Now that we're under contract, and I think you know this as well, Julie, there's no more 6 years, there's no more 10 years, there's no more 2 years. You got 6 months to get that book done. And that's how much time I have. I mean, Blackbirds, I'm reading for revisions, and so I have to fix that in probably 6 weeks. But my other book, the one I'm doing with William Morrow, that one is biographical fiction, and it is 19th century and Victorian age, and my subject is Sarah Bonetta Forbes, who was an African princess who was, in quotes, gifted to Queen Victoria. So I'm writing her life story.
Wow. I can't wait to read all these stories. Denny, you are a force, and I am so grateful that you invited me to do this event with you because, Denny and I are friends outside of this. We've done some traveling together and seen some movies together, and I enjoy your company so much. But reading your book, it felt like I was seeing more of you, and I loved it. And I hope that, folks out there listening are as excited about this book as I am, because it's just, there's music and there's something in there that just makes you want to, keep reading. And oh, you're so sweet. I do have a book as well right behind me.
You do, and a fabulous book as well. But tell me, let's talk about you. I'm looking at the clock, and because, as you know, I'm running like a crazy woman to another event after this one. But I also want you to talk about your book, please, because you're working on a second book, How has the debut experience been for you, in your own words? I have, of course, we're out there together and seeing everything that's happening. I'm excited for us. I'm also, wait a minute, I have to pull up this child. This is our pal, Miss Nancy Johnson.
Nancy Johnson.
Yes,
Shout out to
this is our
Nancy.
pal. This is how I do these events. I have my books.
Yes, the three of us are, Nancy, Denny, and I were at the Sundance Film Festival together last year, and it was one of the last things that I did before lockdown. But yeah, I feel like the debut experience has been, for me, it was 13 years writing this book, and so it took a long time to get here, and it's not what I expected, as I'm sure for you, but I've just been so grateful for people showing up, to these events and listening and engaging and telling their friends about it and writing reviews on Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever you want to put, better places than that, you can put a review. But I feel like people have been supportive and giving us love, and the booksellers. I feel like the independent booksellers like Stacy have been, they're the thing that kept it all moving, because for people like you and me who don't have, the name recognition, nobody would know we exist if these booksellers weren't, putting it in their store window or promoting us in events like this and letting us share our story with people. So I feel like I've gotten to know, the fun thing is I've gotten to know these booksellers all over the place. Like, I feel like I would have done a lot of events in Boston, maybe travel a little bit, but I've been to Florida and Houston and stores in Minnesota, and it's been I think that the willingness of other people to put themselves out to make my book a success has been really moving for me, and just the people who are here tonight, I see some familiar faces, and I'm just grateful. It means a lot to me, and I know it does to you too, I'm sure.
It really does. And in fact, we just did some name dropping, and guess who's in the audience?
Nancy.
Miss Nancy Johnson.
Who has a question, actually.
Oh, Nancy has a question.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Nancy. What have you learned in writing book one that will inform your next books?
I'm going to tell you the biggest thing that I've learned in writing book one is I can't take 6 years to write a book. So I want to organize my process better. And I also have learned that I want to continue to understand the role and importance of character and character development in story. Connecting plot and character. I'm a plotter naturally, so connecting plot and character, I want to continue to make sure I'm killing it or getting it on that level. I really want to make sure that is happening.
Yeah, no, that is great. And I'm laughing because I know Nancy is out there listening to that. And Nancy and I always talk about how plot's not our strength, and we have to struggle to get the plot. So maybe we should be bouncing ideas off of you, since you seem to have the plot element down. And that's
where I love plotting too. And you guys are character-driven writers, and that's your focus is to build out of character. And I love that. I love that ability, and I really want to make sure I'm infusing that in my plotting process.
Well, you did it with this book, because I was turning those pages and couldn't wait to see what and you surprised me in places. I was like, what? And so you've got that plot moving.
I think you will come with me on every tour from now on.
I am. Sign me up. I love hanging out with Denny. So sign me up, and I'm really looking forward to your next books and seeing where it takes you, because I know there's been so much great buzz about this book. I mean, I was on the Oprah list and on all the lists. Everybody's talking about this book, and it's gotten so much love from the media and from other writers. I think did I see Jodi Picoult tweeting about your book?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, I mean,
that was pretty cool. I'm not mad.
It's really cool, and it's well deserved. And I love when good things happen to people that I love. So congratulations on this amazing book, Denny.
Thank you.
All right, Denny, we have one more question for you.
Okay.
Jessie would like to know, what was the time ratio between writing and editing?
Oh, now that's one. Okay, from the time that I handed in the book, I went through what they call 2 levels of revisions on my first book. And so, but the amount of turnaround time I had for copy edits to galleys was an amazingly short period of time. I had 6 weeks for copy edits. I had 2 weeks for galleys.
Wow.
And what the difference in those two things are, copy edits, you're working with, especially with historical fiction, or I had the most amazing copy editor on the planet. She would put maps in to make sure that we had the historical map location and phrases. Now, these are things that I think my journalist brain tends to think about a phrase, an idiom, and double check it automatically to make sure I have it in the right, not just in the right meaning, but in the right time period, because some things just weren't said. And then you have etymology.com or whatever the name of that place is. It's like heaven. It's like the heaven place for historical fiction authors. So yeah, that's ooh, I think I mentioned that I had back-to-back events tonight. I'm looking at the
You have
clock.
to go.
All right, well, we will
Yeah, I
let you go.
gotta pretty much go in a minute.
right.
But I hope I answered that question. I sort of went on a tangent there for a sec. I started getting crazy.
No, that was great.
Well,
Thank you, Denny.
Denny and
Okay.
Julie, thank both of you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us tonight. It was really a great event, and it was really our great pleasure to have you both. And to the people who came and listened, thank you so much, and thank you for your questions.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
I'm writing a note saying thank you all for being here.
And
Sorry,
thank
I
you,
have a
Belmont
few
Books.
minutes. Thank you, Belmont Books, definitely. I'm
It's our
going to jump
pleasure.
off.
Okay.
Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.